People like to say, oh, how could they have killed their mother when she was just sitting there eating a bowl of ice cream? Well, my question is, how can a mother sit there and enjoy a bowl of ice cream with a man who has been repeatedly over the years sodomizing and torturing her children? That's what I want to know. I mean, y'all, think about what he actually did. Think about it. It's been described in these videos. It's about the worst stuff you can imagine. Horrible, painful, torture, degrading, life altering, corrupting, soul tearing. So I wanted to make this video because I think that there are a number of people who haven't been paying much attention to the Menendez brothers' case since they were convicted and sentenced to life in prison, decades ago. It's been what, over 30 years ago, right? And I think there are a number of people who have been surprised by the recent turn of events. And so I wanted to make this video to make a number of things very, very clear. First of all, the number of credible witnesses who have testified that Jose Menendez abused his boys going back to very, very young ages and extending then into their teenagehood and adulthood, and abused them in the most brutal ways. And I think that there are some people who view the Menendez brothers as these cold-blooded killers, and they say, how could they have surprised their parents while their parents were they were just sitting there watching TV, they were just eating ice cream, they were just eating bowls of ice cream. Well, those same parents also were responsible for the brutal, repeated, over the course of years, rape and sadistic torture of their children. You just heard testimony to that effect, not only from the Menendez brothers themselves, but multiple other people. And so I think that people need to understand, and I hope this video is made clear, the extreme nature of the brutality here. And and I think that a lot of people are not giving enough thought to what we're really talking about here when we say that Jose Menendez abused his boys, and also that his wife, their mother, was fully aware of it, not only looked the other way, but was completely unconcerned, it seemed, with this. And so I think that, given that understanding, it makes a lot more sense than the brutality of this crime. And I know the number of people say, well, ultimately they weren't, they're just lying when they say that they were afraid for their lives. They weren't afraid for their lives. They were afraid that they had been cut out of the will, and they wanted to get away from their parents, but they didn't want to give up their cushy lifestyle. Well, I'm not sure that there's any way we can know what was really going on in the heads of Erik and Lyle Menendez in the days leading up to the murder. And so, while it sounds improbable that they were afraid for their lives and acting out of a kind of self defense, I think it's also entirely probable that, having lived under the authoritarian rule of their father and lived in terror of him, and also a kind of a forced dependency where Jose Menendez, in every way possible, fostered and facilitated this feeling on their part that they were nothing without him and apart from him, and that they had to follow his every dictate. And he basically, like, if you look at their biographies, if you look at the story, he controlled and micromanaged every aspect of their life. So his control over every aspect of their lives, and his focus on the money, his focus on their financial dependency, and the fact that they were raised to believe that that success and money were the ultimate priorities in life. All of these things were lessons instilled by their parents. And so I think what we see here is truly a case of chickens coming home to roost. So if it turns out, in fact, that the catalyst, not the reason, not the underlying reason, but the catalyst for these murders was a financial motive, or in part financial motive, to me, that doesn't change the situation. Because if Erik and Lyle Menendez, at that point in their lives when they killed their parents, if they were monsters, if they were behaving monstrously, if they were behaving out of monstrous motives, well, who directly created those monsters? Even bigger, worse monsters. And I understand the argument that we can't officially condone as a society, vigilante justice. We can't have people taking the law into their own hands. Okay, that's fine, but that's why we have something called manslaughter. And the fact that the second trial, the judge was corrupt, he was tired of being a laughingstock and depicted in the media, depicted as a weakling in the media, based on the first trial that had ended in a hung jury. And of course, the media did not understand this case, and it was not only sensationalized, but it was very coverage was very negatively slanted against the Menendez brothers, and there was laughter and guffawing at the idea that men could be raped. And go look at the SNL skit, the Saturday Night Live skit, making fun of the testimony, the tears of Lyle and Erik Menendez. It's outrageous. You wouldn't see it today, would you? In the day of in this modern day of awareness of abuse and Me Too and all that. And so that second trial, it was a sham, and the reason why the first trial was a hung jury, as Gascon said, and the second was a conviction for murder of life sentence, is because the judge was tired of being made a laughingstock of. So he basically excluded all testimony evidence of the sexual assault and basically took that out of the whole narrative. And so taking that out of the narrative, the jury, a number of the people on that second jury, they wanted to give a lesser sentence. They wanted a lesser charge like manslaughter or even second-degree murder. But that's the way that the judge structured the trial, that could not be. And in fact, a number of the jurors on that second jury have since then said that they wish that they had seen all this evidence and been given other options during the trial, because they didn't want to put these guys away for life, most of them. And so I think that while I understand the idea that we can't condone vigilante justice, I think also here we understand that in a moral, ethical sense, and just in a basic, fundamental human sense, we all understand that after this horrendous torture that these boys had endured, and with the full knowledge of their mother, who lifted not a finger to protect them, that it makes perfect sense. It's completely understandable why they would snap and kill their parents. And I just have to say that anytime you have two kids who both turn on their parents and kill them, well, there was some really horrible abuse going on, and there was something really wrong in that family. And the blame for that is not the kids, it is the parents. Now, I've seen other people arguing online also saying that, almost everyone who commits a crime, particularly heinous crimes, they do so often because they were abused. And so are we just going to excuse that? Start excusing all behavior, letting everybody out because they were abused? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a very specific situation where the kids were severely abused by these parents, and then by the father, but abused by the mom as well, and then retaliated against that. That's very different to me than saying that everybody is in prison for a reason, so we should just let everybody out. Okay, it's very, very different. The particularities of the situation, the relationship between the parents and the children, the direct causal link between the victims being killed and what the victims did to, yes, bring that on themselves in this case. And look, I totally understand people saying that this needs to be punished, that we can't just let people go, but they've served 35 years. 35 years. So whatever sentence, as Gascon said, whatever sentence, whatever debt to society they owe, they have more than served it. Now, there have been people who have said that these relatives who have testified and spoken of this abuse and they're supporting these guys, that they're just being paid off, or that they're being somehow influenced by Erik and Lyle. And I just have to say that argument, it might have made a little more sense in the early 90s when these trials were happening, but it makes no sense now, decades later. No one in this who was standing up for these guys is in any way incentivized. They lost their money a long time ago. In fact, they never had it, honestly. If you look into it, the money was almost was untouchable, mostly by them, or almost all gone. What they had access to, there was lots of debt that they had when they went into jail. There wasn't really, I guess what I'm saying is, even at that time, there wasn't much to be bribing relatives with. But certainly decades later, and time tells the truth of things. And so, at the time, maybe we didn't know if these relatives were telling the truth or not, although they seemed so credible even at the time. And there were so many witnesses, as said here in this video. But at the time, we might not have known. But we know now, decades later, people don't stick around like this for a lie. They don't fight for decades for a lie. And you've got the sister of Kitty Menendez, the mother who was, as people like to say, shotgunned repeatedly by these kids. At one point, even had to go out and reload and come back to finish her off. But you've got this woman's sister who is not only standing up fully for these guys decades later in terrible health. She's out there, she's frail, she's on the steps of the courthouse, this press conference, but she's standing up for them. You have her, you have other family members of the victims supporting them. I mean, it's just people don't do this for a lie. They don't do this for a sham. People like to say, "Oh, how could they have killed their mother when she was just sitting there eating a bowl of ice cream?" Well, my question is, how can a mother sit there and enjoy a bowl of ice cream with a man who has been repeatedly over the years sodomizing and torturing her children? That's what I want to know. I mean, y'all, think about what he actually did. Think about it. It's been described in these videos. It's about the worst stuff you can imagine. Horrible, painful, torture, degrading, life altering, corrupting, soul tearing. And you're more disturbed by the fact that these perpetrators and this mother who looked the other way, that they got shotgunned? And you know what, y'all? A lot has been made of the fact that when the mother didn't die immediately, they went out and reloaded and came back and killed her. Well, this might sound crass, but when someone is as messed up as she was after that first round of bullets, the most humane thing then, honestly, is to put them out of their misery. So I don't know. People keep talking about that as a really dastardly act. To me, it just seems like an obvious necessity that after you have gone so far in something, shooting someone up to the point of where they'll be, if they survive this, they're going to be in an utterly tortured, debilitated state. I mean, I think there's just two ways to read this here, and I don't see it like other people do. And I see that they're scared. Yes, they're acting violent and aggressive. They're doing something horrible here. These boys are, and shotgunning their parents, but they're also extremely scared. They're in a crazed state. I do believe that for whatever reason. Partly, yes, fear and then other perhaps financial concerns, all of it mixed together. But again, who created this craziness? Who created these monsters? It's the people who are sitting there happily eating ice cream after their children have been utterly ruined by being repeatedly sodomized and tortured. And that's just the physical and sexual abuse, all of the psychological abuse. It's all out there if you look it up. And finally, to people who say, why should we care about this? There are tons of other people who are unjustly rotting in prison. Well, that's always the case. But sometimes stories come to light for random reasons. In this case, it's a Ryan Murphy Netflix production that's brought this to the forefront of the public eye. And good. And so, yes, you might have tons of cases where justice will not be done. But if we have the opportunity to do it here, let's do it. And I just want to say one other thing, too. Part of the reason why the Menendez brothers got, I believe, an unnecessarily long sentence in the first place and an unjust second trial was because they had gotten so much media attention and so much of it was sensationalized. Going back to the SNL skit, everyone's laughing and they're being depicted as ridiculous, brats, liars. Well, the media sword cuts both ways. It cut against them in the 90s. Maybe it's about time it cuts for them now. And I don't see anything wrong with that. And so what if there's a certain amount of female interest because they're attractive? I'm glad they've got that going for them. Again, that's not what this really comes down to. Because no matter what they look like or they don't look like or they're wealthy or they're not, when you read or you hear the details of the horrendous abuse that they suffered, unfathomable, and you hear from all of these different sources about how horrible of a human being Jose Menendez was, to me, that's what it comes down to. And so you don't have to like the Menendez brothers. You don't have to think they're angels. You don't have to agree with what they did. You can be horrified and disgusted by what they did. But do you really think that 35 years isn't enough? Don't you think it's time for them to be released? And the last thing I want to say is we're supposed to convict in criminal proceedings in this country based on a reasonable doubt estimation. In other words, when you say someone is guilty of murder, for instance, what you were saying is that beyond a reasonable doubt, you think they're guilty. Well, let me ask you a question. Those of you who doubt that the Menendez brothers were horribly abused? Or those of you who aren't sure, wouldn't you have to concede that there's more than reasonable doubt here on the side of the Menendez brothers? Doubt in Jose as a good father, doubt in Kitty as a good mother. So, they've served 35 years. I think there's more than enough doubt on their side about this case and more than enough indications that there was likely terrible abuse here. All right, everybody, check out my work. I have a lot of other videos and a lot of other things, including another interesting LA celebrity case that George Gascon is interested in. Except in this case, Gascon is doing the cowardly thing, not the morally courageous thing. But I'm talking about the Me Too hoax targeting Marilyn Manson. So if you're interested in that, a lot of other stuff, check out my channel.